The scream tore through the North Tower before dawn, and every guard in the castle froze at the sound of it. Wren Calloway pressed her back against the cold stone wall of her small room, heart pounding, as heavy boots thundered past her door. She was not supposed to be awake at this hour. She was not supposed to be anywhere near the parts of the castle where real danger lived. But the shouting outside her window told her that something had gone terribly wrong, and within seconds, her door burst open without a single knock. King Calen Thornwood filled the doorway, broad shoulders tense, eyes burning gold in the low candlelight. He did not look like a king in that moment. He looked like a man ready to tear the world apart with his bare hands. "Get up," he said. His voice was low, controlled, but underneath it ran a current of something sharp and urgent. "There has been a breach at the eastern wall. You are not staying in this room tonight." Wren's mind raced. A breach meant enemies inside the territory. A breach meant the deal she had signed only 3 days earlier. The strange, cold, businesslike agreement that had brought her to this castle in the first place was already being tested in ways she never expected. She had come to Blackthorn territory for one reason only: money. Her family owed a debt to a rival pack, a debt so large it threatened to swallow her mother's home and her younger brother's future. When the offer came through a quiet contact, whispered in hushed rooms, far from prying ears, it had sounded almost simple. The king needed an heir. He needed a surrogate. He would pay enough to erase every debt her family carried, and in exchange, she would carry his child and then disappear from his life forever. No love, no relationship, no pretending, just a transaction between two people who needed very different things from the same outcome. She had agreed because she did not see another way out. She told herself it would be easy. She told herself she could keep her heart locked away, untouched, the entire time. But standing there now, watching Calen's jaw tighten as another shout rang out from somewhere below, she realized nothing about this arrangement would be simple. "Move," he said again, and this time, it was not a request. She grabbed her shawl and followed him into the corridor, her bare feet cold against the stone floor. Guards ran past them in both directions, some carrying torches, others gripping short blades at their sides. The air smelled of smoke, faint but unmistakable, curling in from somewhere near the outer wall. "What happened?" she asked, struggling to keep pace with his long strides. "Someone crossed the boundary line," Calen said without slowing down. They knew exactly where the patrol gaps were. That kind of knowledge does not come from luck. "You think someone inside the castle helped them?" He did not answer right away, and his silence told her more than words could. They reached a narrow staircase, and he took her arm, not roughly, but firmly, guiding her down toward the lower levels, where the old stone walls grew thicker and the air grew cooler. "You will stay here until this is resolved," he said, stopping in front of a heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands. Inside was a modest room, clearly used for storage until recently, now hastily cleared, and fitted with a simple bed and a small writing table. Wren looked around, unimpressed, but too tired, and too frightened to complain. "This is where you keep valuable things you want to protect," she said quietly, "or things you want to hide." Something flickered across Calen's face, gone before she could name it. "Right now," he said, "you are both." The words landed strangely between them. Neither valuable nor hidden had ever felt like compliments before, yet from him, in that moment, they carried a strange kind of weight. "You mean the child," she said, because it was easier to believe that than anything else. "I mean, you are carrying my heir," Calen corrected, his voice returning to its usual cool control, as if he needed to remind himself as much as her. "Nothing can happen to you until the Pack Council confirms the pregnancy and the succession is secured. After that, our arrangement continues exactly as agreed." There it was again, the reminder, the invisible wall he kept building between them, brick by careful brick, every time something soft threatened to slip through. "I understand the arrangement," Wren said, lifting her chin. "You do not need to repeat it every hour." For a moment, something almost like amusement touched the corner of his mouth. Almost. Then a guard appeared at the end of the corridor, breathless, blood on his sleeve. "Your Majesty," the guard said, "we caught one of them. He is asking to speak only to you." Calen's expression hardened instantly. He turned back to Wren. "Lock this door behind me. Do not open it for anyone but me or Garrett." "Who is Garrett?" "My second in command. You will meet him properly soon enough." He paused at the doorway, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read, something between concern and irritation at his own concern. "Stay safe, Ren." It was the first time he had said her name like that, not as a formality, not as a term in a contract, but simply as her name, quiet and direct. Then he was gone, boots echoing down the corridor, leaving her alone in the small stone room, with her heart beating far too fast for someone who was supposed to feel nothing. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pressed a hand against her stomach, still flat, still showing no sign of the changes she knew were already beginning inside her. 3 days ago she had been a stranger, walking through the castle gates with a single bag and a heavy heart. Now she was locked in a hidden room, while a king fought off enemies at his border, all because of the life quietly growing within her. Time passed slowly in the windowless room. She measured it by the distant sounds beyond the door, shouts rising and falling, the occasional clash of metal, then silence, then more shouting. She thought of her mother back home, unaware of the danger her daughter now sat in the middle of. She thought of her brother, still young enough to believe the world was mostly kind. She had taken this path to protect them, and she refused to regret it, no matter how frightening the nights ahead might become. A soft knock finally broke the silence, 3 careful taps followed by a pause, then 2 more. She recognized the rhythm as a signal, though she did not know how. "It is Garrett," a deep voice said through the door. "The king sent me to check on you." She hesitated, remembering Kalen's instructions, then decided the code knock was proof enough. She opened the door to find a tall man with dark hair and a calm, steady presence standing in the corridor, a small lantern in one hand. "The threat has been contained," Garrett said, stepping inside, only after she gestured for him to enter. 3 intruders were caught near the eastern fence line. One escaped into the woods before we could stop him. And the king? Uninjured, though he will not admit how close it came to being otherwise. Garrett studied her for a moment, something thoughtful in his gaze. "You are the surrogate." It was not really a question, but Ren answered anyway. "Yes." "He has never brought anyone to the inner storage room before," Garrett said, almost as if speaking to himself. "Not even during the worst attacks in recent memory." Ren did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing at all. Garrett did not push further, simply nodding once, before stepping back toward the door. "Rest if you can," he said. "The king will likely wish to speak with you once the situation is fully under control. He does not like loose ends, and tonight has left quite a few of them." After Garrett left, Ren lay back on the narrow bed, staring up at the low stone ceiling, listening to the fading sounds of activity beyond the walls. Sleep did not come easily. Her mind kept circling back to the strange softness in Kalen's voice when he had said her name, the way his jaw had tightened, not out of irritation but something closer to worry, the fact that he had personally come to move her to safety rather than simply sending a guard. None of it fit the picture she had built of him before arriving. The stories she had heard described a cold, calculating ruler who cared for nothing beyond duty and bloodline, a man who had shut his heart away completely after losing his mate years earlier. She had expected exactly that. She had prepared herself for exactly that. It would have made everything so much simpler. But simple was already slipping away from her, one quiet moment at a time. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through the small high window she had not noticed the night before. She woke to the sound of the door opening, and this time it was Kalen himself, dressed in fresh clothes, though the shadows under his eyes betrayed a night without rest. "The threat is dealt with," he said without preamble. "You will move back to your original chambers within the hour." Ren sat up, pushing hair from her face. "What happened to the intruders?" "They were sent by Ashgrove," Kalen said, and the name came out edged with old anger. "Damon Ashgrove has wanted a piece of this territory for years. He saw an opportunity in the confusion of the succession crisis and decided to test our defenses." "Does he know about me?" Kalen's silence stretched a beat too long before he answered. "Not yet, and he will not learn of it if I have any say in the matter." He crossed the small room, stopping only a few feet from where she sat. "Your safety is now tied to the future of this pack, Ren. That is the only reason last night mattered so much." The words were meant to draw a line, to remind her of the boundaries between them, yet his eyes told a different story entirely, one his voice refused to admit. "The only reason," Ren repeated softly, testing the words, watching how they seemed to catch slightly in his throat. "The only reason," he said again, firmer this time, as if repeating it enough might make it true. She held his gaze a moment longer than necessary, long enough to see something flicker behind the golden color of his eyes, something he clearly did not want her to see. Then he turned and walked toward the door. "Breakfast will be brought to your chambers," he said over his shoulder. "Rest today. Tomorrow the council will want to confirm the pregnancy formally, and after that, life here will change for both of us." He left before she could ask what he meant by that, and Ren sat alone in the quiet room, her hand once again drifting to her stomach, wondering just how much her life, and perhaps his as well, was about to change in ways neither of them had planned or agreed to when the contract was first signed. Outside, the castle slowly returned to its normal rhythm, guards resuming their posts, servants moving through corridors with trays and linens, the danger of the night fading into whispered rumors among the staff. But something had shifted in that storage room during the darkest hours before dawn, something neither Ren nor Kaelin could yet name, though both of them had felt it settle quietly between them, like the first seed of something neither had asked for, yet neither could fully deny. A goblet shattered against the stone floor of the council hall, and the sharp sound made every head in the room turn at once. Edmund Voss, the oldest advisor to the throne, had thrown it there himself, his weathered face flushed with anger he no longer bothered to hide. "You brought a surrogate into the inner chambers during an attack," Edmund said, his voice trembling with restrained fury. "You risked exposing her existence to the entire staff, before the council even confirmed the pregnancy." Kaelin stood at the head of the long table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "I protected the future of this pack. That is my duty as king. Your duty," Edmund shot back, "is to remember that a surrogate is a tool for succession, nothing more. The moment you start treating her like something precious, you invite exactly the kind of danger we saw 2 nights ago." Ren stood just outside the heavy council doors, having been summoned to wait in the antechamber, while the healers confirmed what she already knew in her body. She could hear every word through the thick wood, and each one landed like a small stone dropped into still water, spreading cold ripples through her chest. Tool. Nothing more. She had known this from the beginning. She had signed the contract with her eyes open, understanding exactly what role she was meant to play, yet hearing it spoken so plainly, so coldly, by a man who had known Kaelin far longer than she had, made something in her chest ache in a way she had not expected. The doors finally opened, and a healer named Ivy stepped out, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked hair and gentle hands. "It is confirmed," Ivy said quietly to Ren. "You are truly carrying the king's child. The council will want to speak with you directly now." Ren straightened her shoulders and walked into the hall, feeling the weight of every gaze land on her at once. Edmund studied her the way one might study a stray animal that had wandered too close to something valuable. Other council members, older men and women with sharp eyes, watched with equal parts curiosity and suspicion. Kaelin's expression, when she met his eyes, had shifted back into the careful neutrality she now recognized as his armor. "The pregnancy is confirmed," he announced to the room, his voice carrying easily across the stone chamber. "The succession is secured. Miss Calloway will remain under the protection of this castle until the child is born." "And after the birth?" Edmund asked pointedly, though his eyes stayed fixed on Kaelin rather than Ren. "After the birth," Kaelin said, each word measured and deliberate, "the original terms of the arrangement will be honored in full." The words felt rehearsed, almost forced, and Ren wondered if he was reminding the council or reminding himself. Either way, the message landed exactly where it was meant to. She was temporary, a vessel for the future, nothing more, exactly as Edmund had said moments earlier through the closed door. The council meeting continued with discussions of security measures, increased patrols along the eastern boundary, and formal announcements to be made to the wider pack about the succession being secured, though the details of how remained carefully vague for public ears. Ren stood through most of it in silence, answering only the few questions directed at her, feeling more like a piece of furniture being discussed than a person with thoughts of her own. When the meeting finally ended, she left the hall quickly, eager to escape the weight of so many watching eyes. She did not expect Kaelin to follow her, yet his footsteps caught up to her within moments, matching her pace as she walked toward the garden courtyard. "You heard what Edmund said before you entered," he said. It was not a question. "I heard enough," Ren replied, refusing to slow her steps. "He speaks out of old habit. He has advised 3 kings before me, and forgets sometimes that circumstances change. Do they? Ren stopped and turned to face him fully. Because from where I am standing, nothing about my circumstances has changed at all. I am still exactly what the contract says I am. A tool, nothing more. Something flashed across Kaylin's face, quick and sharp, gone before she could name it. That is not how I see you. Then how do you see me? She asked, and the question hung heavy in the air between them, larger than either of them seemed prepared to answer. Kaylin opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly wrestling with something he did not want to admit even to himself. The silence stretched long enough that Ren finally shook her head and turned to continue walking, disappointment settling quietly in her chest, even though she told herself she had no right to feel disappointed at all. Ren, he said finally, and she paused without turning around. The night of the attack, when I came to move you to safety, it was not only about the child. She turned slowly, searching his face for the truth behind the words. Then what was it about? I do not know yet, he admitted, and for the first time since she had met him, his voice carried something close to vulnerability. But it was not only duty. I know that much. The admission seemed to cost him something, a small crack forming in the careful control he wore, like a second skin. Ren did not know what to do with the honesty, so she simply nodded and let the silence settle between them, softer now than it had been moments before. They walked together through the garden courtyard, neither speaking much, though the quiet no longer felt as sharp or as distant as it once had. Ren noticed small things she had missed before, the way Kaylin's shoulders relaxed slightly away from the council hall, the careful attention he paid to the uneven stones beneath her feet, adjusting his pace without seeming to think about it. Over the following days, similar quiet moments began accumulating between them, small threads weaving together almost without either of them noticing. Kaylin began appearing at meals he once skipped entirely, claiming he needed to discuss security arrangements, though the conversations often drifted far from anything related to the eastern boundary. He walked with her through the gardens in the evenings, ostensibly to ensure her safety, though his attention lingered on her far longer than protection required. Ren found herself looking forward to these moments more than she wanted to admit. She told herself it meant nothing, that a king simply checking on the mother of his heir was only practical, expected even. Yet late at night, lying awake in her chambers, she could not deny the way her chest warmed whenever she heard his familiar footsteps in the corridor outside her door. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the attack, she found him standing alone in the garden long after the sun had set, staring up at the stars with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something raw and unguarded. You are not sleeping, she observed, stepping quietly beside him. Neither are you, he replied, without looking away from the sky. I could not stop thinking about something you said, about it not only being duty. Kaylin finally turned to look at her, moonlight softening the sharp angles of his face. I have spent years building walls around myself, Ren. After losing my mate, I told myself I would never again allow anyone close enough to hurt me that deeply. And now those walls seem to be failing rather quickly, and I am not entirely sure how to feel about that. The confession hung between them, fragile and honest, more vulnerable than anything he had shared before. Ren felt her own carefully guarded heart respond to his words in ways she had promised herself would not happen. I made a similar promise to myself, she said quietly. After everything that happened before I came here, I told myself I would keep my heart locked away during this arrangement, protect myself from getting hurt again. And how is that working for you? He asked, a hint of dry humor breaking through the tension. Ren almost laughed, the sound surprising even herself. Not particularly well, if I am being honest. Kaylin's expression softened into something almost like relief, as if her admission gave him permission to feel the same uncertainty without shame. Neither of them spoke further that night, simply standing together beneath the stars, the silence between them no longer empty but full of unspoken possibility, dangerous and uncertain, yet somehow impossible to walk away from. As the days continued to pass, whispers began moving through the castle staff, quiet observations about the king lingering near the surrogate's chambers, about shared meals and evening walks that stretched far longer than duty required. Edmund Voss noticed these whispers as well, and his suspicion sharpened into something closer to alarm, though he said nothing directly to Kaylin just yet, choosing instead to watch and wait. gathering evidence of a shift he intended to challenge the moment it threatened the stability of the succession he had sworn to protect. Ren remained unaware of exactly how closely she was being watched, focused instead on the strange, unexpected warmth growing steadily within her chest, a warmth that frightened her far more than any enemy attack ever could, because, unlike an enemy, this danger came wrapped in gentle words and careful glances, and she found herself utterly unwilling to defend against it. A folded note lay on Ren's writing table when she returned to her chambers. No signature, no seal, only a few sharp words written in unfamiliar handwriting. Know your place before the king forgets his. She read it twice, her hands trembling slightly, before folding it closed and pressing it into the bottom of a drawer, refusing to let fear settle too deeply into her thoughts. She did not need a note to remind her of the danger she had wandered into. She had felt it building for days, in the sideways glances from certain staff members, in the way conversations quieted whenever she entered a room where court officials gathered. The whispers about her and Kaelin had grown louder than either of them realized, and not everyone in the castle welcomed the change. That evening, she found Kaelin in his study, hunched over a stack of reports concerning the eastern boundary patrols. He looked up when she entered, and something in her expression must have given her away, because he immediately set down his quill.
What happened?
He asked. She hesitated, then decided honesty served her better than silence. Someone left a note in my chambers. A warning, I suppose you could call it. Kaelin rose from his desk immediately, crossing the room toward her. Show me. She retrieved the note from her drawer and handed it to him, watching his jaw tighten as he read the brief, cold message. This is Edmund's handwriting, he said quietly, anger simmering beneath his controlled tone. You are certain? I have read his reports for years. I would recognize this handwriting anywhere. Kaelin crushed the note in his fist, frustration radiating from him in waves. He has no right to threaten you. Perhaps he believes he has every right, Ren said carefully. I am not truly part of this pack, Kaelin. I am an outsider, carrying your heir under a contract that ends the moment the child is born. From his perspective, I imagine any attachment beyond that arrangement looks like exactly the kind of instability he has spent his life protecting the throne from. You are defending him? I am trying to understand him, Ren corrected, which is more than either of us have done for each other since this began. Kaelin studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his golden eyes. You think I should apologize to him for caring about your safety? I think, Ren said slowly, that perhaps we have both been careless. We have let something grow between us, without considering what it truly means for either of our futures, and now, other people are noticing, before we have even decided for ourselves, what any of this is supposed to become. The words settled heavily in the quiet study, honest in a way that made both of them uncomfortable. Kaelin set the crumpled note aside and moved closer, close enough that Ren could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the distance still separating them. What do you want this to become? He asked quietly. The question caught her off guard, more direct than anything he had asked before. For a moment, she considered lying, retreating back behind the safety of their original arrangement, the clean, simple contract that promised no complications, no heartbreak, no risk. But something in his expression, open and searching in a way she had rarely seen from him, made honesty feel like the only real option. I do not know, she admitted, but I know that pretending nothing has changed between us is no longer possible. Not for me, at least. Kaelin reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished, and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. The touch was light, careful, yet it sent warmth spreading through her entire body, chasing away the chill the threatening note had left behind. Not for me either, he said quietly. For a long moment, neither of them moved, caught in a fragile bubble of honesty neither had expected to find themselves inside. Then a sharp knock at the study door broke the spell entirely, and both of them stepped back quickly, composing themselves before Kaelin called out permission to enter. Garrett stepped inside, his expression grim. Your Majesty, we have received word from a scout patrolling the western trade routes. Ashgrove's people have been asking questions in the villages near the border. Specific questions about the surrogate. Ren's stomach dropped. They know about me. They suspect, Garrett clarified. Rumors have been spreading faster than we anticipated. Someone within the castle has been talking, Kaylin's expression darkened considerably. Find out who. We already have several possibilities, Garrett said carefully, though none of them point directly to proof just yet. After Garrett left, the warmth that had briefly filled the study evaporated entirely, replaced by a tension that made Wren's chest tighten with worry. If Ashgrove learns the full truth, she said, what happens then? He would see an opportunity, Kaylin said grimly. A vulnerable point he could exploit to weaken my claim to the throne. Or worse, to use you as leverage against me directly. Would he try to take me? Kaylin's silence answered the question more clearly than words ever could. He crossed the room and gripped her shoulders gently but firmly. I will not let that happen, Wren. I promise you that. You cannot promise something like that, she said softly. Not with certainty. Then I promise to try with everything I have, he said instead, his voice fierce and steady. That much I can guarantee. Despite the fear tightening in her chest, something in his conviction settled her nerves slightly. Yet as the days that followed brought increased security around the castle, additional guards stationed near her chambers, and Kaylin's mood growing steadily more tense and distracted, Wren began to feel the weight of an impossible situation pressing down on her from every direction. She started noticing Edmund watching her more openly during meals, his expression cold and calculating. Other council members followed his lead, their politeness growing thin and forced whenever she was present. The staff, once warm and welcoming, began treating her with cautious distance, as though associating with her too closely might bring trouble down on their own heads. The isolation began wearing on her more than she expected. She missed her mother's laughter, her brother's easy company, the simple comfort of feeling truly welcome somewhere. Here, despite the growing warmth between herself and Kaylin, she often felt like a stranger standing in the middle of a storm she had not chosen to create. One afternoon, feeling particularly overwhelmed by the weight of watching eyes and whispered suspicions, Wren decided to pull back from the closeness that had been building between herself and Kaylin. She began declining his invitations to walk in the gardens, citing tiredness or the need for rest. She kept conversations at meals brief and formal, careful to give the watching council nothing further to comment on. Kaylin noticed immediately, his confusion evident in the way he studied her from across the table during meals, though he did not push the distance she was creating. Perhaps he assumed she needed space after the threatening note, or perhaps some part of him understood exactly what she was doing and why, even without her explaining it directly. One evening, he finally caught her alone in the corridor outside her chambers, his expression carrying a quiet frustration she had not seen from him in weeks. You are avoiding me, he said simply. I am protecting both of us, Wren replied, refusing to look away despite the ache building in her chest. The council already sees us as a problem waiting to happen. If I keep my distance, perhaps their suspicion fades, and you can focus on securing your throne without worrying about the complications I have brought into your life. And if I do not want distance between us, then you are choosing something that puts everything you have worked for at risk, Wren said quietly. I signed a contract to give you an heir, Kaylin. Nothing more. I never intended to become a threat to your rule. Kaylin stepped closer, his voice low and steady. You have never been a threat to my rule, Wren. If anything, you have become the one thing in this castle that still feels honest. The words nearly broke through her careful resolve, yet she forced herself to hold firm, remembering the cold note hidden in her drawer, remembering Edmund's suspicious glances, remembering the very real danger that Ashgrove now posed, simply because rumors had begun spreading about her importance to the throne. Please, she whispered, let me protect what little peace we have left, even if that means keeping some distance between us for now. Kaylin studied her for a long, heavy moment, clearly wanting to argue further, yet ultimately nodding once, respecting the boundary she had drawn even as pain flickered behind his golden eyes. He stepped back, allowing the distance she requested, though the reluctance in his movements spoke louder than any words could have. As he walked away down the corridor, Wren pressed a hand against the cold stone wall beside her, willing her racing heart to settle, wondering how much longer she could keep pretending that the growing bond between them meant nothing at all, when every fiber of her being screamed the exact opposite truth. The teacup slipped from Wren's fingers and shattered across the floor, moments after she took the first sip, a strange bitterness spreading across her tongue that had nothing to do with the herbs Ivy usually prepared for her. Her vision blurred, her knees buckled, and the last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the sound of her own name being called from somewhere far away. She woke to bright candlelight and the worried face of Ivy hovering above her, along with Kalen standing rigid at the foot of the bed, his knuckles white where he gripped the wooden frame. "What happened?" Ren asked, her voice raspy and weak. "You were poisoned," Ivy said gently, checking her pulse with careful fingers. "Something bitter and dangerous mixed into your evening tea. Fortunately, you did not drink enough to cause lasting harm to you or the child, but it was close. Closer than I would like to admit." Fear flooded through Ren immediately, her hand flying to her stomach. "The baby is safe," Ivy assured her. "I have checked thoroughly, but you must rest, and we must find out immediately who did this." Kalen's expression, when Ren finally looked at him fully, was terrifying in its stillness, a barely contained fury simmering just beneath the surface. "I already have guards questioning every member of the kitchen staff," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Whoever did this will be found." "You think it was deliberate," Ren said, though she already knew the answer. "I know it was deliberate," Kalen replied. "This was not an accident, Ren. Someone wanted to end this pregnancy, or perhaps end you along with it." The distance she had carefully built between them over the past days crumbled entirely in the face of such danger. Kalen moved to her bedside, taking her hand in his grip firm and grounding despite the tension radiating from his entire body. "I should not have let you keep your distance from me," he said quietly. "If I had been paying closer attention, perhaps I would have noticed something was wrong sooner." "This is not your fault," Ren said, though her voice remained weak. "Someone chose to do this. That responsibility belongs to them alone." Garrett appeared in the doorway then, his expression grave. "Your Majesty, we found something." He held out a small vial, empty now, its glass stained faintly with residue. It was hidden among the kitchen supplies, wrapped inside a cloth marked with Ashgrove's sigil. Kalen's jaw tightened until Ren feared he might crack a tooth. "Ashgrove reached inside my own walls. It appears someone on the inside allowed the poison to be smuggled through," Garrett continued carefully. "We are still determining who might have assisted, but the sigil confirms Ashgrove's involvement beyond doubt." The revelation sent a fresh wave of fear through Ren's already weakened body. If Ashgrove had reached this deep into the castle already, what else might he attempt in the days ahead? She thought of the threatening note from weeks earlier, wondering now whether Edmund's warning had been separate from this attack entirely, or somehow connected in ways she had not considered. "I want the kitchen staff questioned again," Kalen said to Garrett. "Every single person who had access to her food or drink over the past week. I do not care how long it takes, or how many people we must interview. Whoever helped smuggle that poison inside these walls will answer for it." Garrett nodded and left immediately to carry out the order, leaving Kalen alone with Ren and Ivy once more. Ivy busied herself preparing a restorative tonic, giving the couple a small measure of privacy despite remaining in the room. "I am frightened," Ren admitted quietly, the words costing her something to say aloud. "Not for myself alone, but for the child. I never expected carrying your heir would place me directly in the path of your enemies." "I never expected it either," Kalen said, guilt threading through his voice. "When I first proposed this arrangement, I imagined a simple, contained situation. I did not anticipate Ashgrove seeing an opportunity to strike at the heart of my succession through you." "Perhaps we were both naive," Ren said softly. Kalen brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles, a gesture so unexpected and tender that Ren's breath caught in her throat. "I will not let naivety cost either of you your lives," he said firmly. "From this moment forward, you will have guards stationed outside your door at all times. Your meals will be prepared separately, tasted before they reach you. I am not taking any further chances with your safety." "And the distance I asked for between us?" Ren asked carefully. "Do you still intend to honor that request?" Kalen's expression softened, though determination remained clear in his golden eyes. "I understand why you asked for it, Ren. I respected your reasons, even when it cost me greatly to do so. But after tonight, I cannot pretend that keeping my distance protects you any better than staying close does. If anything, I believe staying close, staying vigilant, gives me the best chance of ensuring nothing like this happens again." Ren considered his words carefully, weighing the fear that had driven her to create distance against the very real danger that had nearly cost her life and the child's life that same evening. Perhaps distance had never truly protected either of them. Perhaps it had only made them both more vulnerable, distracted by hurt feelings and unspoken longing, rather than focused on the genuine threats surrounding them. "Then stay close," she said quietly. "Please." Something shifted in Kaylin's expression, relief and tenderness mixing together in a way that made her chest ache with warmth, despite the lingering weakness in her body. He settled into the chair beside her bed, refusing to leave, even after Ivy finished preparing the tonic, and quietly excused herself from the room. Over the following days, Ren's strength gradually returned, though the shadow of the poisoning lingered over the entire castle. Guards questioned every kitchen worker repeatedly, yet no clear culprit emerged, only vague suspicions and nervous denials. Whoever had assisted Ashgrove's plan had covered their tracks carefully, leaving Kaylin increasingly frustrated and Ren increasingly anxious about who among the castle staff she could truly trust. Kaylin kept his promise, remaining close throughout her recovery, checking on her multiple times each day, personally overseeing the preparation of her meals when his duties allowed it. The careful distance they had maintained before the poisoning attempt dissolved entirely, replaced by an openness neither of them tried to hide any longer. One evening, as Ren sat wrapped in blankets near the fireplace in her chambers, Kaylin arrived carrying a small wooden box, setting it gently in her lap. "What is this?" she asked, lifting the lid carefully. Inside lay a delicate silver pendant, shaped like a crescent moon, simple yet beautifully crafted. "It belonged to my mother," Kaylin explained, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "She wore it as a symbol of protection, believed to ward off those who wished harm upon the wearer. After what happened, I want you to have it." Ren lifted the pendant carefully, feeling the weight of the gesture, far beyond the physical object itself. "Kaylin, I cannot accept something so precious to your family." "You are carrying my family's future," he said quietly. "I can think of no one more deserving of my mother's protection than you." The words settled deep in her chest, warm and overwhelming, breaking through whatever remaining walls she had tried to maintain between them. She allowed him to fasten the pendant around her neck, his fingers lingering gently against her skin as he secured the clasp. "Thank you," she whispered. "Promise me you will be more careful," Kaylin said, settling into the chair beside her once more. "I do not think I could bear losing you now, Ren. Not after everything that has grown between us these past weeks." The confession, quiet yet undeniable, confirmed what Ren had already begun to suspect in her own heart. Whatever this arrangement had started as, it had transformed into something far deeper, far more dangerous to both their carefully guarded hearts, and far more precious than either of them had ever anticipated when the original contract was first signed. The council chamber doors slammed shut hard enough to rattle the iron hinges, and Ren, passing by in the corridor outside, stopped abruptly at the sound of raised voices bleeding through the thick wood. She recognized Kaylin's voice immediately, tight with restrained anger, and beneath it, Edmund Voss, his tone sharp and unyielding. "This obsession with her safety has clouded your judgment," Edmund was saying. "You have doubled the guards at her door, personally overseen her meals, delayed important trade negotiations to sit at her bedside. The council notices these things, Your Majesty, and so does every enemy watching this territory for signs of weakness. Protecting the mother of my heir is not weakness," Kaylin replied, his voice low and dangerous. "It is exactly the opposite. Protecting her is one matter, falling for her is another entirely," Edmund shot back, and Ren's breath caught painfully in her chest at the words. "The staff whispers of it constantly. Even Ashgrove's spies have likely caught wind of the attachment growing between you. You have handed your enemy a weapon, Your Majesty, and you continue polishing it with every tender glance you give that woman." "Careful, Edmund," Kaylin warned, his voice dropping into something almost feral. "I am simply stating what everyone already knows," Edmund continued, undeterred. "You agreed to this arrangement for one purpose, an heir, nothing more. The moment that child is born, she was meant to leave this castle with her debts paid and her role fulfilled. Yet here we are, weeks later, and you speak of her as though she might remain permanently at your side." Silence followed, heavy and telling, and Ren pressed her hand against the cold stone wall to steady herself, waiting desperately for Kaylin's response. "Perhaps my feelings toward her have changed since we signed that contract," Kaylin finally admitted, his voice quieter now, though no less firm. I did not expect it, Edmund. I fought against it for longer than you realize. But I will not apologize for caring deeply about someone who has shown me more honesty and warmth than most of this court combined. Feelings do not secure a throne, Edmund said coldly. Bloodlines and alliances do. If you intend to keep her beyond the birth of the child, you must understand the political consequences. Other packs expected a proper mate chosen through alliance, someone whose family carries influence and strength to offer this territory. A surrogate paid to disappear carries none of that. Keeping her at your side, elevating her status, will be seen as an insult by every neighboring pack watching how you conduct yourself as king. Ren's heart sank with each word, the harsh political reality Edmund described settling over her like a heavy stone. She had known, distantly, that her position carried no true standing within pack hierarchy, yet hearing it laid out so plainly, so coldly, made the fragile hope blooming in her chest feel suddenly foolish and impossibly naive. I did not ask for your approval, Edmund, Kaelin said finally. I asked for your loyalty. There is a difference. My loyalty is precisely why I speak so plainly, Edmund replied, his voice softening only slightly. I have served this throne through 3 generations of kings. I watched your father struggle to hold this territory together, after losing your mother too soon. I watched you struggle after losing your own mate. I do not wish to see this pack fractured further by decisions made from the heart rather than from wisdom. The mention of Kaelin's deceased mate seemed to shift something in the conversation, the tension easing slightly, though not entirely. Ren strained to hear more, but the voices dropped too low to make out clearly, and she finally forced herself to continue walking, unable to bear listening any longer to a conversation that felt like it was slowly dismantling every fragile hope she had allowed herself to build. That evening, Kaelin found her in the garden, sitting quietly beside the small fountain that had become one of her favorite places within the castle grounds. He sat beside her without speaking at first, clearly gathering his thoughts before finally breaking the silence. You heard the council meeting today, he said. It was not a question. Some of it, Ren admitted, refusing to hide the truth from him. Enough to understand the concerns Edmund raised. He is not entirely wrong, Kaelin said carefully. The political reality of my position is complicated. Other packs will judge how I choose to handle this arrangement, and those judgments carry real consequences for the safety and stability of everyone within this territory. Ren nodded slowly, forcing herself to remain composed despite the ache building steadily in her chest. Then perhaps Edmund is right. Perhaps whatever has grown between us should end here, before it complicates your position any further. That is not what I want, Kaelin said quickly, turning to face her fully. I am not saying this to push you away, Ren. I am saying this because I need you to understand exactly what choosing to keep you beside me would truly mean. It would mean facing opposition from every corner of this territory. It would mean proving to skeptical allies that my judgment remains sound, despite following my heart rather than tradition. It would mean a difficult path for both of us, one that offers no guarantee of an easy outcome. And is that a path you are willing to walk? Ren asked quietly, searching his face for the truth. Kaelin reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his own. I have spent years building walls to protect myself from ever feeling this deeply again. After losing Lyra, I told myself love was a luxury I could no longer afford as king. That duty alone would have to sustain me for the rest of my life. But you have shown me something I had forgotten was possible, Ren. You have shown me that duty and love do not have to exist as opposites. The mention of his deceased mate's name, spoken so openly for the first time since Ren had arrived at the castle, carried weight far beyond the words themselves. She understood, suddenly, just how much courage this conversation was costing him, how deeply he had buried that part of himself after such a devastating loss. I am frightened too, she admitted softly, not only of Ashgrove, or of poison in my tea, or of council members who see me as nothing more than a temporary arrangement. I am frightened of hoping for something more, only to watch it fall apart under the weight of everything working against us. Then let us be frightened together, Kaelin said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability threading through it. I cannot promise the path ahead will be easy, Ren. I cannot promise Edmund and the council will accept this quickly, or that Ashgrove will stop threatening what we are building together. But I can promise that I no longer wish to walk this path pretending you mean nothing to me. Tears gathered in Ren's eyes, unexpected and overwhelming, as months of careful emotional guarding finally began crumbling entirely. I do not want to leave after the child is born, she whispered, the confession costing her everything she had left to protect herself. I know that contradicts everything we agreed to when this began, but I cannot pretend otherwise any longer. Then you will not have to leave, Kaelin said firmly, pulling her gently into his arms. Whatever battles await us with the council, with Ashgrove, with tradition itself, we will face them together, from this moment forward. For the first time since arriving at the castle, Wren allowed herself to fully believe in the possibility of a future beyond the original contract, beyond fear and suspicion and threatening notes hidden in drawers. Yet even as hope bloomed cautiously in her chest, a shadow of worry remained, knowing that Edmund's warnings about Ashgrove's spies and growing political tension were unlikely to fade quietly into the background, and that the true test of their fragile new understanding still waited somewhere ahead in the uncertain days to come. A hand closed over Wren's mouth from behind before she even heard footsteps approaching, and panic exploded through her body as she was dragged backward away from the market stall she had been admiring only seconds earlier. She had insisted on this trip into the nearby village, tired of feeling trapped within castle walls, and Kaelin had reluctantly agreed, sending Garrett and 2 additional guards along to ensure her safety. It had not been enough. She bit down hard against the fingers pressed over her lips, earning a muffled curse from her attacker, though his grip did not loosen. Around her, the market square had descended into chaos, merchants shouting, villagers scattering, and somewhere close by, she heard Garrett's voice roaring orders through the commotion. Do not fight, a rough voice growled against her ear. Ashgrove only wants a conversation with the king. You are simply the invitation. Terror gripped her chest as she was hauled toward a waiting cart, hidden behind a row of market stalls, her attacker's grip like iron around her arms. She managed to twist enough to catch a glimpse of Garrett fighting off 2 men with practiced efficiency, but a third attacker blocked his path toward her, buying precious time for her captor to shove her roughly into the back of the cart. Let me go, she gasped, finally freeing her mouth enough to speak. Quiet, the man snapped, pressing something rough and confining around her wrists. The sooner you cooperate, the sooner this ends peacefully for everyone involved. The cart lurched forward, wheels rattling violently over uneven cobblestones, carrying her away from the market square, and the sounds of fighting fading rapidly behind her. Wren fought against the rising panic threatening to overwhelm her, forcing herself to think clearly despite the fear coursing through every part of her body. She thought of the child growing within her, of Kaelin's face if he learned she had been taken, of everything they had only just begun building together, after finally allowing themselves to hope. She refused to let fear paralyze her completely. The cart traveled for what felt like hours, though she suspected it was closer to a single hour, winding along rough forest paths far from the main roads. Eventually it stopped, and rough hands pulled her out into a small clearing, where several armed men waited, along with a tall figure she instantly recognized from Kaelin's description of the man who had caused him so much trouble. Damon Ashgrove studied her with cold, calculating eyes, his expression carrying none of the warmth Kaelin showed even in his most guarded moments. So this is the surrogate everyone whispers about, he said, circling her slowly. Kaelin Thornwood has grown careless in his old age, letting something so valuable wander outside his walls, with only a handful of guards for protection. What do you want? Wren demanded, refusing to let the tremor in her voice show more fear than she already felt. A simple negotiation, Ashgrove replied smoothly. Kaelin will hand over control of the disputed eastern territories in exchange for your safe return. A fair trade, I believe, considering how much he clearly values you. He will never agree to that, Wren said, though uncertainty flickered through her as she spoke the words. Ashgrove's smile widened, cold and calculating. Then perhaps he values his throne more than he values you, and the child you carry. We shall see rather quickly which matters more to him. Wren was led toward a small wooden structure at the edge of the clearing, pushed inside, and left alone with her bound wrists and racing thoughts. Through a small gap in the wooden slats, she could see guards positioned around the perimeter, far too many for her to consider any attempt at escape on her own. Hours passed slowly, marked only by the shifting patterns of light filtering through gaps in the wooden walls. She thought constantly of Kaelin, wondering if Garrett had survived the ambush at the market, wondering how quickly word of her capture would reach the castle, wondering whether Ashgrove's demands would truly be enough to secure her release, or whether this entire situation might end far more violently than anyone hoped. As darkness began falling outside her makeshift prison, she heard raised voices near the edge of the clearing, followed by the unmistakable sound of a large group moving through the forest with purpose. Her heart leaped with cautious hope, though fear kept it carefully guarded, unwilling to celebrate prematurely. The door to her small prison burst open suddenly, and Ashgrove stood in the doorway, his expression tight with barely controlled fury. "It seems your king moves faster than I anticipated," he said coldly. "Come, we are leaving this location immediately." Ren was dragged roughly back outside, where chaos had erupted throughout the clearing. Shouts echoed through the trees, the clash of weapons ringing sharply through the cool evening air, and somewhere amid the confusion, she caught sight of a familiar figure moving with lethal, focused precision through Ashgrove's scattered guards. Kalen had come himself. Ashgrove noticed him at nearly the same moment, his grip tightening painfully around Ren's arm as he pulled her closer, using her as a shield against the king's rapid approach. "Stop right there, Thornwood," Ashgrove commanded, "or I will ensure your precious surrogate never sees another sunrise." Kalen froze instantly, his golden eyes blazing with barely contained fury, though his voice remained deadly calm. "Let her go, Ashgrove. This conflict is between us. She has nothing to do with the disputes between our territories." "She has everything to do with it," Ashgrove replied. "The moment you decided her safety mattered more than your throne. That decision, Thornwood, was your first mistake." Ren felt the cold press of a blade against her side, and terror threatened to overwhelm her rational thoughts entirely. Yet even trapped in such a dangerous position, she forced herself to remain still, trusting that Kalen would find a way through this impossible standoff, refusing to give Ashgrove any further advantage through her own panic. "What do you want?" Kalen asked, his voice tight with restrained fury. "The Eastern Territories," Ashgrove said, "signed over formally, witnessed by neutral parties, in exchange for her safe return." "Done," Kalen said immediately, without hesitation. Ashgrove's eyes narrowed with suspicion at how quickly Kalen agreed. "You would surrender valuable territory so easily for a mere surrogate." "She is not merely a surrogate," Kalen said, his voice carrying across the clearing with absolute conviction. "She is the woman I intend to make my queen, and the mother of the heir, who will one day rule everything you are trying to steal from me. Her safety is worth far more to me than any territory you could ever demand." The declaration, spoken so publicly and so fiercely in front of Ashgrove's remaining guards, sent a jolt of shock through Ren's entire body, momentarily overshadowing even the terror of the blade still pressed against her side. She had not expected such an open admission, especially not under circumstances this dangerous, yet hearing it settled something deep within her chest, despite the peril still surrounding them both. Ashgrove studied Kalen for a long, tense moment, clearly weighing his options carefully. "Very well," he finally said. "The territories, signed and witnessed, in exchange for her safe release. But know this, Thornwood, this will not be the last time our paths cross over matters of ambition and power. I look forward to ending this rivalry permanently, whenever that day comes," Kalen replied coldly. Slowly, carefully, Ashgrove released his grip on Ren, shoving her forward toward Kalen, while his remaining guards backed away, weapons lowered, but not yet abandoned entirely. Ren stumbled forward, and Kalen caught her immediately, pulling her protectively against his chest, while keeping his wary gaze fixed firmly on Ashgrove and his retreating men. "Are you hurt?" Kalen asked urgently, checking her over with frantic, careful hands. "I am fine," Ren managed, though her voice trembled with the aftermath of fear, finally beginning to release its grip on her body. "Frightened, but unharmed. The child is safe as well, I believe." Relief flooded across Kalen's face, quickly replaced by fierce protectiveness, as he guided her carefully away from the clearing, guards forming a protective circle around them, as they made their way back toward the waiting horses, and the long journey home, to the safety of the castle walls. A fist slammed against the council table hard enough to make the ink pots rattle, and this time it was not Edmund who had lost his composure, but Kalen himself, standing rigid before an assembly of furious advisors demanding explanations for the territories he had signed away. "You gave Ashgrove exactly what he wanted," one council member said sharply. "Land that took 3 generations to secure, surrendered in a single evening for the sake of one woman. I would surrender it again without hesitation, Kalen replied, his voice carrying dangerous steel beneath its calm surface. She was in danger. That danger existed because of decisions I made, choices I made regarding her safety within these walls. I will not apologize for correcting a mistake that nearly cost an innocent life. Ren stood outside the council chamber once more, having insisted on attending despite Kalen's protective objections following her ordeal only 2 days earlier. She listened through the door, her wrists still bearing faint marks from the rough bindings, her body slowly recovering from the physical toll of her abduction, though her mind remained far from settled. The Eastern Territories provided crucial trade routes, Edmund said, his voice tight with frustration rather than his usual cold calculation. Losing them weakens our economic position for years to come. The pack will feel this loss long after the current crisis fades from memory. Then we will find new routes, Kalen said firmly. We will rebuild what was lost through trade negotiations and diplomatic efforts, rather than through careless disregard for the safety of the people within my care. People, Edmund repeated pointedly, not person. You speak as though an entire population depended on that woman's safety, when in truth, only your personal feelings drove that decision. My personal feelings, Kalen said slowly, are inseparable from my judgment as king, Edmund. I would think you of all people would understand that, after everything my father endured following my mother's passing, a king who cannot protect those he loves is no king worth following at all. The mention of his parents seemed to shift something within the room, several older council members exchanging glances that carried decades of shared history. Ren could not fully understand from her position outside the door. Finally, the meeting adjourned, council members filing out with expressions ranging from resigned acceptance to lingering frustration, though none openly challenged Kalen further as they departed. Ren stepped aside to let them pass, several offering curt nods in her direction, a small but noticeable shift from the open hostility she had grown accustomed to in previous weeks. Perhaps witnessing the very real danger she had faced, and Kalen's fierce response to it, had softened some of their earlier judgment, even if grudgingly. Kalen found her waiting once the chamber emptied, exhaustion evident in the tired lines around his eyes. You should not have listened to that, he said, though there was no real reprimand in his tone. I needed to understand what your decision cost you, Ren said quietly. I cannot ask you to sacrifice your kingdom's stability for my sake, without at least witnessing the full weight of that sacrifice honestly. It was not a sacrifice made lightly, Kalen admitted, guiding her toward a quiet alcove away from the bustling corridor. But it was also not a decision I regret, despite everything Edmund and the council believe about the cost. That night, sleep proved elusive for Ren, her mind replaying fragments of her capture over and over. The rough hands, the cold blade against her side, the fear that had gripped her so completely in those endless hours within Ashgrove's makeshift prison. She woke suddenly from a shallow, restless doze, heart pounding, certain for a disorienting moment that she remained trapped within that small wooden structure, rather than safe within her own familiar chambers. A soft knock at her door interrupted her racing thoughts, followed by Kalen's quiet voice. Ren? I heard sounds of distress through the walls. She opened the door, finding him already dressed, despite the late hour. Concern etched deeply into his features. Bad dreams, she admitted, embarrassed by how shaken her voice sounded even to her own ears. Without hesitation, Kalen stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. Do you want to talk about it, or would you prefer distraction from it entirely? I do not know, Ren admitted honestly. Every time I close my eyes, I am back in that clearing, feeling that blade against my side, wondering if you would reach me in time. I will always reach you in time, Kalen said firmly, settling onto the edge of her bed and gathering her carefully into his arms. Whatever it takes, Ren, I will always find a way to reach you. She allowed herself to lean into his embrace, drawing comfort from the steady warmth of his presence, the reassuring strength of his heartbeat beneath her ear. I am frightened that this will happen again, she whispered. Ashgrove made it clear, our conflict is far from finished. What if next time? You cannot reach me before something terrible happens. I have already increased security measures throughout the castle and surrounding villages, Kalen said gently. You will never travel again without a full guard escort, and I intend to personally oversee every aspect of your protection moving forward, regardless of what the council believes about my judgment. Even if it costs you more territory, more political standing? Even then, Kaelin said without hesitation, I have spent this entire evening listening to advisors calculate the value of trade routes and territorial boundaries, Ren. Not one of those calculations comes close to measuring what losing you would truly cost me. The confession, quiet yet absolute, settled something deep within her chest that fear had been steadily unraveling since her capture. She tilted her head back to look at him fully, searching his face for any hesitation, any doubt lingering beneath his words, yet finding only unwavering conviction. I believed, when I first arrived here, that I would leave this castle exactly as unattached as when I entered it, she admitted softly. I convinced myself protecting my heart was the only reasonable choice, considering everything our arrangement was built upon. But I do not think that protection was ever truly possible, not once I began seeing who you really are, beneath the cold reputation everyone whispers about. And who am I, in your eyes? Kaelin asked quietly. Someone who fought his way through an entire clearing of armed men to reach me, Ren said. Someone who surrendered valuable territory without a moment's hesitation to secure my release. Someone who sits beside me now, well past midnight, simply because he heard distress through the walls and refused to let me face it alone. Kaelin's expression softened considerably, something raw and vulnerable breaking through his usual composed exterior. I love you, Ren, he said simply, the words carrying none of the careful hesitation that had marked every previous near admission between them. I have loved you for weeks now, though I fought against acknowledging it for far longer than I should have. Today, watching you stumble toward me from that clearing, alive and safe, despite everything Ashgrove threatened, I understood with complete certainty that I could not continue pretending otherwise, regardless of what it costs me, politically or personally. Tears gathered in Ren's eyes, warm and overwhelming, as months of careful emotional protection finally dissolved entirely beneath the weight of his honest confession. I love you as well, she whispered. I have for some time now, though admitting it felt like inviting heartbreak I was not certain I could survive. You will not need to survive that heartbreak, Kaelin said firmly, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead. Not while I still draw breath to protect what we have built together, regardless of contracts, council objections, or enemies determined to tear us apart. They remained together through the remainder of that long night, her fears gradually softening beneath his steady, comforting presence, both of them finally allowing themselves to fully embrace a truth neither had expected to find when this arrangement first began, yet neither could imagine living without, now that it had settled so completely into both their hearts. A messenger arrived at the castle gates just before sunrise, mud-splattered and exhausted from a hard ride through the night, carrying news that made Ren's blood run cold the moment Garrett relayed it to her. Her younger brother, Colin, had been confronted by men working for the creditors her family still owed, men growing impatient, despite the partial payments her surrogacy arrangement had already provided. They threatened him directly, Garrett explained gently, watching her face carefully for signs of distress. Your mother sent word immediately, though the messenger traveled slowly given the weather along the northern roads. Is he hurt? Ren asked, fear tightening around her throat. Shaken, but unharmed, Garrett assured her. Though the creditors made clear they expect full payment soon, regardless of the timeline originally agreed upon. Informed immediately of the situation, found Ren pacing anxiously in her chambers, the old fear and helplessness she thought she had left behind resurfacing with painful intensity. I will send guards to protect your family immediately, he said firmly, and I will personally handle the remaining debt myself, in full, today. You do not need to do that, Ren said, though gratitude and relief flooded through her at his immediate offer. I want to, Kaelin replied. Your family's safety matters to me, Ren, not simply because of our arrangement, but because they matter to you. As guards were dispatched, and arrangements made to settle the remaining debt entirely, Ren found herself sitting quietly with Kaelin later that evening, the earlier crisis gradually easing into cautious relief. Yet the fear the news had stirred within her lingered, resurrecting old wounds she had carefully buried since childhood. This is not the first time my family has faced danger, because of debts we could not pay, she admitted quietly. My father left when I was young, unable to handle the pressure of providing for us. He simply disappeared one night, leaving my mother to raise Colin and myself entirely alone. I grew up believing that people leave when circumstances become too difficult, that love is conditional upon convenience. Kalen listened carefully, his expression gentle and attentive. Is that why you agreed to this arrangement so readily? Believing you would simply disappear once your role was fulfilled, exactly as you expected everyone eventually does? Partly, Ren admitted. I convinced myself it would be easier to leave first, on my own terms, rather than risk being left behind again, by someone I had allowed myself to care for deeply. I understand that fear more than you might realize, Kalen said quietly, his voice carrying a weight Ren had not heard from him before. When Lyra died, it was sudden, unexpected, and utterly devastating. We had been mated for only 2 years, still building our life together, still learning how to rule alongside one another, as partners, rather than simply as king and queen. Her loss taught me that love, no matter how deep or genuine, offers no guarantee of permanence. How did she die? Ren asked softly, sensing this was a story he rarely shared with anyone. An illness that struck suddenly, spreading through the castle one harsh winter, Kalen said, his voice tightening with old grief. Our healers tried everything possible, yet nothing could save her. I remember sitting beside her bed for 3 days straight, refusing to believe that someone so full of life could simply slip away so completely. After she passed, I closed myself off entirely, convinced that allowing myself to love again would only invite the same devastating loss eventually. And yet here we are, Ren said gently, both of us having built walls specifically designed to prevent exactly the situation we now find ourselves in. Walls that failed rather spectacularly, Kalen said, a faint, rueful smile touching his lips, despite the heaviness of the conversation. Perhaps that failure is not entirely a bad thing, Ren said thoughtfully. I spent years believing love always ends in abandonment, either through choice or through circumstance beyond anyone's control. Yet you have shown me something different these past weeks. You have shown me that some people choose to stay, even when circumstances make staying difficult. And you have shown me, Kalen replied, that opening my heart again does not have to mean forgetting what I shared with Lyra, or dishonoring her memory. It simply means allowing myself to build something new, something equally real, even while still carrying the love I once had for her. They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while, each processing the weight of shared vulnerability, the old wounds finally given voice, after being carried alone for so long. Ren found herself thinking of her mother, of Colin, of the family she had feared losing entirely to circumstances beyond her control, and felt a fierce gratitude toward the man beside her, who had acted immediately to protect them without hesitation. Thank you, she said quietly, for settling my family's debt so completely. You do not need to thank me for that, Kalen said. Your family will soon be my family as well, Ren, assuming you are willing to accept everything that means for both of our futures. The implication behind his words settled heavily and warmly in her chest. You are speaking of more than simply continuing our current arrangement, she said carefully. I am speaking of making you my queen, Kalen said, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he proposed. Not simply the mother of my heir, bound by contract and temporary arrangement, but my true mate, bound by choice and genuine devotion, for the remainder of both our lives. Ren's breath caught entirely at the directness of his declaration, hope and fear warring fiercely within her chest. Edmund and the council will never accept such a decision easily, she said, though her voice trembled with cautious hope, rather than outright rejection of the idea. Then we will convince them together, Kalen said firmly. I have spent my entire reign making decisions based on duty and tradition alone. It is time I made a decision based on what my heart knows to be true, regardless of the resistance it may face. And Ashgrove? Ren asked. He will see this as further weakness, further opportunity to exploit. Ashgrove already believes I am weak for valuing your safety over territory and tradition, Kalen said. Let him believe whatever he wishes. My priority has never truly been proving strength through cold detachment, Ren. My priority is building a kingdom worth protecting, filled with people who matter to me, starting with you and our child. Ren reached for his hand, holding it tightly, feeling the old fear of abandonment, slowly loosening its grip on her heart, with each passing moment spent in his steady, unwavering presence. Then let us face whatever challenges come next together, she said softly, starting with convincing your council that love and duty are not the opposing forces Edmund seems to believe they must always be. Kaelin brought her hand to his lips once more, pressing a lingering kiss against her knuckles, sealing the quiet promise settling between them with a tenderness that spoke louder than any formal declaration could have managed. Outside, the castle continued its usual evening rhythms, unaware that within these quiet chambers, two people who had each sworn never to love again were slowly, carefully, choosing to build a future together, despite every obstacle still standing firmly in their path. Horns sounded across the castle grounds just after midday, summoning every member of the pack to the great hall for an announcement Wren had not been warned about. She hurried through the corridors, heart pounding with uncertainty, until Ivy caught her arm gently near the entrance. "Edmund has called for a formal pack assembly," Ivy said quietly. "He intends to invoke an old law requiring surrogates to leave the territory immediately, once pregnancy reaches its final stage, citing tradition and stability for the unborn heir." Wren's stomach dropped. Her pregnancy had indeed progressed significantly over recent weeks, her condition now visible enough that whispered speculation among the staff had turned into open acknowledgement. "Can he truly force this?" she asked. "If the full assembly votes in his favor," Ivy said grimly, "then yes, even the king would struggle to overturn such a decision, without appearing to defy pack law entirely." Dread settled heavily in Wren's chest as she entered the great hall, finding it already filled with pack members from every corner of the territory, their voices creating a low, anxious hum beneath the vaulted stone ceiling. Kaelin stood near the raised platform at the front of the hall, his expression carefully controlled, though Wren could see tension coiled tightly beneath his composed exterior. Edmund stood beside him, and when he caught sight of Wren entering, something like reluctant respect flickered briefly across his weathered features, before settling back into firm resolve. "Let the assembly begin," Edmund announced once the hall had quieted sufficiently. "I have called this gathering to address a matter of pack law and succession stability." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Edmund explained the situation, carefully outlining the tradition requiring surrogates to depart before the final stages of pregnancy, citing ancient precedent meant to prevent exactly the kind of political complications that had already cost the territory valuable eastern lands. Wren stood near the back of the hall, feeling countless eyes shift toward her as Edmund spoke, judgment and curiosity mixing together in the collective gaze of the assembled pack. "The king's attachment to the surrogate," Edmund continued, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, "has already resulted in significant losses and dangerous complications. I propose the assembly vote to enforce tradition, ensuring the surrogate departs immediately under safe escort, with generous compensation, while the king focuses entirely on the stability and safety of his territory and his unborn heir." Silence followed, heavy and expectant, before Kaelin finally stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention throughout the hall. "I have listened carefully to Edmund's concerns," he began, his voice steady and resonant, "and I understand the tradition he speaks of carries genuine weight, born from generations of careful precedent, designed to protect this pack's stability." Wren's heart sank at his measured tone, fearing for one terrible moment that he intended to honor Edmund's proposal, despite everything they had shared privately in recent weeks. "However," Kaelin continued, and something shifted in his voice, growing fiercer and more determined, "I did not become king simply to follow tradition blindly, regardless of whether it serves the true well-being of the people I am sworn to protect. Wren Calloway is not merely a surrogate fulfilling a temporary contract. She has proven her courage facing Ashgrove's forces directly. She has proven her loyalty despite threats made against her safety within these very walls. And she has proven, beyond any doubt, that she possesses exactly the strength and wisdom this territory requires in a queen." Gasps rippled through the assembled crowd, whispers exploding into louder conversation, before Kaelin raised a hand, silencing the hall once more. "I intend to make Wren my true mate," he continued, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "Not as a political arrangement, not as a temporary solution to secure an heir, but as a genuine choice, made freely, because she has earned my complete trust and devotion through everything we have faced together these past months." Wren stood frozen near the back of the hall, tears gathering unexpectedly in her eyes, as Kaelin's declaration settled over the assembled crowd, some faces showing shock, others cautious curiosity, and a few, particularly among the younger pack members, expressions of genuine approval. "Your Majesty," Edmund said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "The Assembly has not yet voted on this matter. Tradition demands." "Tradition demands many things," Kalen interrupted firmly. "Yet tradition also evolves when circumstances prove it necessary. I am not asking this Assembly to abandon everything our ancestors built. I am asking this Assembly to trust my judgment as your king, judgment that has been tested repeatedly these past months, and has not once wavered from prioritizing the true safety and strength of this territory." He turned then, extending his hand toward where Ren stood, inviting her forward in full view of the entire assembled pack. Ren hesitated only a moment before crossing the hall, feeling every eye upon her as she moved toward the platform where Kalen waited. "I ask this Assembly," Kalen said once she stood beside him, "to witness my choice freely, and to extend to Ren the same respect and loyalty you have always shown me as your king. Together, we will build a future for this territory that honors both tradition and genuine devotion, proving that the two are not mutually exclusive forces, but rather complementary strengths, capable of securing our pack's future, far beyond what rigid tradition alone could ever accomplish." A long silence followed, the entire hall holding its collective breath, before a voice near the front of the crowd finally called out in support. Soon others joined, murmurs of approval spreading gradually through the assembly, until a clear majority voiced their support for the king's decision. Even Edmund, though his expression remained tight with reservation, offered a stiff, reluctant nod, recognizing the shifting tide of opinion throughout the hall. "The assembly acknowledges the king's judgment," Edmund finally announced, his voice carrying clear disappointment, despite his formal acceptance of the outcome. "Ren Calloway shall remain within the territory, recognized as the king's chosen mate, pending the completion of proper mating rituals following the birth of the heir." Relief flooded through Ren so completely that her knees nearly buckled beneath her, Kalen's arm coming immediately around her waist to steady her against him. The assembled crowd began to disperse gradually, quiet conversations breaking out throughout the hall as pack members processed the momentous announcement they had just witnessed. "You did not need to declare all of that so publicly," Ren whispered, once they finally found a quiet corner away from lingering onlookers. "I needed this pack to understand exactly how serious my intentions toward you truly are," Kalen replied, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead. Edmund would have continued challenging our relationship indefinitely otherwise, using every private conversation and quiet moment as ammunition against what we are building together. This way, there can be no more doubt, no more secret whispers questioning my judgment or your place within these walls. Ren rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling the last remnants of fear and uncertainty finally settling into something resembling genuine peace. "Thank you," she said softly, "for choosing me so completely, despite everything it has cost you." "You are not a cost, Ren," Kalen said firmly. "You are the greatest gift this arrangement could have possibly brought into my life, and I intend to spend the rest of my reign proving exactly how deeply I mean that, starting the moment our child finally arrives into this world we have fought so hard to make safe for them." Sharp pain gripped Ren's abdomen without warning in the middle of the night, forcing a gasp from her lips, loud enough to wake Kalen instantly from sleep beside her. Within seconds he was upright, alert, his hand already pressed gently against her stomach. "The baby," she managed through gritted teeth. "I think it is time." Kalen moved with startling speed, calling for Ivy and the castle healers even as he helped Ren settle back against the pillows, his composed exterior cracking slightly to reveal genuine nervousness beneath his usual steady confidence. "Everything will be fine," he said, though the words seemed directed as much toward himself as toward her. "You look more frightened than I feel," Ren managed, a weak laugh escaping despite the pain building steadily through her body. "I have faced armed enemies without flinching," Kalen admitted, gripping her hand tightly. "Yet nothing has ever frightened me quite like this moment." Ivy arrived quickly, along with 2 additional healers, immediately taking charge of the situation, with calm, practiced efficiency. "First births often take considerable time," Ivy explained, checking Ren carefully. "We have hours ahead of us yet, Your Majesty, though I understand that offers little comfort in this particular moment." The hours that followed tested every ounce of strength Ren possessed, pain building in waves that left her gasping and trembling, Kaelin remaining steadily by her side throughout, refusing every suggestion that he leave the room, despite tradition suggesting kings typically waited elsewhere during such moments. "I am not leaving," he said firmly, when Ivy gently suggested he might be more comfortable outside. "I have already broken enough tradition these past months. I do not intend to abandon this particular one now." As dawn began breaking through the high windows of her chambers, Wren felt an overwhelming urge to push, and Ivy's calm instructions guided her through the final, exhausting moments of labor. Kaelin held her hand throughout, murmuring steady encouragement, his own composure clearly strained under the weight of watching her endure such intense pain, yet his presence provided an anchor she clung to desperately through every difficult contraction. Finally, after one final exhausting push, a thin cry pierced the quiet morning air, and relief flooded through the entire room as Ivy carefully lifted a small, healthy child into view. "A daughter," Ivy announced, her voice warm with genuine joy. "Strong and healthy, Your Majesty." Kaelin's expression transformed entirely as he looked upon his newborn daughter for the first time, wonder and overwhelming love replacing the tension that had gripped his features throughout the long night. Ivy gently placed the child against Wren's chest, and exhaustion melted away almost instantly as Wren gazed down at the tiny, perfect face staring back up at her. "She is beautiful," Wren whispered, tears streaming freely down her face. "She is perfect," Kaelin agreed, his voice thick with emotion as he leaned close, pressing a gentle kiss first against his daughter's small forehead, then against Wren's temple. "Thank you," he said softly, "for giving me this incredible gift." "We gave each other this gift," Wren corrected gently, "together." Word of the healthy birth spread quickly throughout the castle, and by midday, cautious celebration had begun rippling through the entire territory, relief evident among pack members who understood the significance of a secured succession after months of uncertainty and danger. Even Edmund, arriving later that afternoon to formally offer his congratulations, seemed genuinely moved by the sight of the newborn heir, his usual stern composure softening considerably as he studied the small child. "She has her mother's eyes," Edmund observed quietly, surprising Wren with the gentleness in his tone. "And her father's stubbornness, if her grip is any indication," Wren replied, managing a tired smile despite her exhaustion. Edmund's mouth twitched with something almost like genuine amusement. "I owe you an apology, Miss Calloway. I judged your presence here as a threat to stability, when in truth, you have brought a strength to this territory that mere tradition alone could never have secured. I hope you will forgive an old advisor his stubborn adherence to outdated fears." "There is nothing to forgive," Wren said warmly. "You were protecting what you believed mattered most for this pack's future. I understand that now more than I did when we first met." As days passed and Wren slowly regained her strength, the formal mating ritual long promised finally took place within the castle's great hall, filled once more with pack members from across the territory. Though this time the atmosphere carried none of the earlier tension and suspicion. Wren stood beside Kaelin as vows were exchanged, ancient words binding them together not through contract or obligation, but through genuine, freely chosen devotion witnessed by their entire community. Their daughter, named Ilara after Kaelin's own grandmother, remained held gently in Ivy's arms throughout the ceremony, occasionally cooing softly, as if adding her own quiet approval to the proceedings unfolding around her. Later that evening, as celebrations continued throughout the castle grounds, Wren found a quiet moment alone with Kaelin, on the same garden terrace, where months earlier he had first admitted that something beyond duty had begun growing between them. "Do you remember," she said softly, "when you told me you did not know yet what last night's rescue meant, only that it was not purely duty?" "I remember," Kaelin said, pulling her gently against his side as they gazed out over the peaceful grounds below. "I did not yet understand what I was feeling then. I only knew I could not bear the thought of losing you." "And now?" Wren asked. "Now I understand completely," Kaelin said, turning to face her fully, his golden eyes warm with absolute certainty. "I love you, Wren. Not because our contract required an heir, not because circumstances forced us together, but because you have shown me, time and again, exactly the kind of strength, courage, and genuine warmth I never imagined finding again after losing Lyra. You did not simply give me an heir, you gave me back my capacity to love fully, without fear, without reservation. Ren leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder as she watched the stars beginning to emerge across the darkening sky above them. "When I first arrived here," she admitted, "I believed I would leave this castle exactly as I entered it. My heart carefully protected, untouched by anything beyond the simple transaction we agreed upon. I never imagined I would leave instead as your queen, holding a love I never expected to find, let alone believe I deserved." "You deserve every bit of happiness we have built together," Kaelin said firmly. "And I intend to spend the rest of our lives together proving exactly that, every single day, starting with the family we have only just begun building." Somewhere within the castle walls, their daughter slept peacefully in her nursery, entirely unaware of the difficult, dangerous journey her parents had traveled to reach this quiet, hopeful moment together. Ashgrove remained a distant threat somewhere beyond their borders, and challenges surely still awaited them in the years ahead. Yet standing together beneath the stars, hearts finally open after years of careful, painful protection, Ren and Kaelin faced their future without fear, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it exactly as they had faced everything before, completely and unshakably together.